village of Umuagu was known for its deep traditions. Among them was the custom that a widow must remain in her husband's home for a full year of mourning. But when Nkem, a woman in her mid-40s with no children, lost her husband, the laws of tradition did not protect her. Nkem's husband, Maduka, had been a respected hunter, known for his generosity and wisdom. One fateful evening, he ventured into the forest to set traps, but never returned. A search party found his lifeless body near a river, his chest pierced by the tusk of a wounded wild boar. His death sent shockwaves through the village, and mourning began immediately. His funeral was a grand affair, as was customary for a man of his stature. Elders chanted prayers, women wailed, and the community came together to honor him. Nkem sat in mourning, covered in ashes, as tradition demanded. But beneath her grief, uncertainty loomed. Without children, her position in her husband's home was fragile. On the 40th day after Maduka's passing, as she still mourned, her world was shattered. Obiora, Maduka's brother, stood before the gathered family members and elders. "You have no son to inherit this house. Leave before sunset," he commanded, his voice cold and unwavering. Nkem gasped. She had expected grief, loneliness, but never this cruelty. "This is my home," she pleaded. "I have honored my husband and served his family faithfully." But Obiora's mind was set. He saw no use for a childless widow in their home. The elders, unwilling to challenge him, remained silent. The villagers who once sang her praises turned their faces away. Some whispered that it was unfair, but none dared to speak aloud. When the sun began to set, Obiora's men forcibly removed her belongings and threw them outside. She was pushed beyond the compound's gate like a stray dog. She turned to the villagers for help, hoping someone would stand by her side, but they averted their eyes. Friends she had known for years hurried into their homes, shutting their doors as she passed. She was no longer welcome. Nkem had always known loneliness. She was an orphan, without a single relative to call her own. From the time she could walk, she had learned to fend for herself, finding comfort only in her faith and the kindness of strangers. But kindness was a fleeting thing, and when misfortune struck, she was the first to be cast away. Rejected and abandoned after the death of her husband, Nkem had no choice but to leave. She wandered to the edge of the village, her bare feet blistering on the rough path. With nowhere to turn, she walked deep into the thick forest that bordered the village, carrying only her suitcases and her Bible. There she made a small hut and cleared a patch of land. She found wild cassava plants and nurtured them. With patience and skill, she cultivated a thriving farm. To survive, she harvested vegetables and carried them to distant villages where people did not know her story. She sold her produce and bartered for essentials, fending for herself entirely during the long, painful year of mourning. Then came the famine. The sky withheld its rain, the rivers receded, and the land cracked under the sun's merciless gaze. The once prosperous village of Umuago withered, its people growing weak from hunger. The newly wedded women in the village became barren, and the farmers' harvest failed miserably. The villagers watched helplessly as their granaries emptied, their stomachs hollow and aching. Yet, in the heart of the forest where Nkem lived, the famine did not reach. The rain still fell there, the streams still flowed, and her crops flourished as though the land itself had chosen to protect her. Nobody dared enter that forest because they deemed it an evil forest. Her cassava plants yielded abundantly, her vegetables thrived, and she had more than enough to sustain herself. The elders called for diviners, who cast their cowries and shook their heads. "Your land is dry because you cast out the one who should have been honored," one of them declared. "Seek Nkem's forgiveness, or the land will remain cursed." Nobody knew this, but Maduka had always harbored secret desires for Nkem. Though he had a wife and 3 children, His attraction to Nkem only grew stronger after his own wife's figure changed with childbirth. Maduka's lust for Nkem turned into obsession, and he saw his brother's death as an opportunity to claim her as his own. At first, he approached her with false sympathy, offering to take her under his wing as tradition sometimes permitted. But Nkem, still grieving her husband, firmly refused. She knew that his advances were not born out of love or duty, but from selfish desires. Maduka persisted, pressing her with gifts and promises, yet Nkem remained steadfast. Each rejection fueled his resentment until his desire turned to cruelty. Out of frustration and wickedness, Maduka used his influence in the family to drive Nkem out of the matrimonial home. Few weeks after all of this, Maduka fell terribly ill, his once thriving business crumbling to ruins as his body withered away. No healer could cure him. Maduka's sins had cursed not only him, but the entire village. To lift the curse, he had to confess his wrongdoings to his family, who will then send a delegate into the evil forest to seek Nkem's forgiveness. Only then will his health be restored and the famine ceased. With no other choice, Maduka, weak and hollow-eyed from suffering, gathered his family and laid bare his sins. His wife wept, his children recoiled in disbelief, and the elders shook their heads in sorrow. Honoring the diviner's decree, the family sent a delegation, accompanied by the elders, into the feared forest. Some sacrifices had to be made before the people could venture into the forest. Trembling, they arrived at Nkem's hut, their knees sinking into the damp earth as they pleaded for her mercy. But it was Maduka who shook the most, his body frail, his voice barely a whisper. Nkem, forgive me. Biko, please forgive me. I am so sorry. He begged, his breath ragged. If you do not forgive me, I will surely perish, and the land with me. Biko, I am so sorry. Nkem, her heart weighed down by months of pain and betrayal, studied the desperate faces before her. She had suffered alone, cast out like a curse upon the land. Now she held their fate in her hands. Maduka was no longer the fearsome bully she had greatly hated. Now she held their fate in her hands. Will she grant them mercy, or will she let them reap the full measure of their cruelty? She prayed silently for wisdom. Suddenly, the wind blew, and everyone heard a whisper from the forest. Nkem, you have done well. You made me proud. Let it go. Maduka fell flat on the ground, and the rest of the delegates cowered in fear. It was the voice of Maduka's late brother, the voice of Nkem's late husband. Then came redemption and restoration.